Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Spilling Tea. I'm your host, Tiffany Daniels. And yes, we are going back to our Medicaid series, but we're going to be very specific. We'll get to that here in a moment, but first the disclaimers and the trigger warnings. Before we get into the disclaimers, why do I sound weird today while talking? Well, folks, I have temporary prosthetics for the two front teeth as of right now. No, my problem is not fixed, but this is going to allow me to be able to eat and drink without causing me pain or having to find weird ways to have to drink things to not cause myself pain. So, I'm not used to the prosthetics yet. So I sound a little bit weird when I talk. I do want to go ahead and apologize for that right up front here. Hopefully I'll get more used to it and get a little bit better. And in the meantime, hopefully find a dentist that won't charge me $14,000 to fix my teeth when I have insurance. Just saying. Okay. Disclaimers, folks. Regards to our little Medicaid series here, just in case anybody else wants to be a smartass, like a recent commenter, all the things we go over throughout the entirety of the Medicaid series, including all the sources I use in regards to the information that I report on and go into detail in. You're going to find linked right there in the description box with helpful labels for you. So if you want to click on them and deep dive them on your own, you're absolutely able to. And hopefully that will also, now that you're being told, stop any moronic comments of source and you just have TDS. Just saying everybody has Trump derangement syndrome is not a real way to combat anyone. It's not a good debate tactic. It just makes you look like you only know how to use high school name-calling tactics. Okay? It's dumb. It's really dumb. We on this channel welcome, always, fair and honest debate. We do not welcome individuals who really don't have a defense. So they go directly to name calling and, talking on other people's families. It will not be tolerated on my channel, and this is your only warning you will receive. Okay? Good. Alright, now, trigger warnings. We do have this channel marked not for kids for a reason. We use profanity. We do cover some dark topics like the Judge Rotenberg Center and Agape Boarding School for Boys. So if you have a child that is 16 and younger and they are watching this, parental supervision is very much advised. Now, obviously, Medicaid has become something that is literally become a political powder keg. So I want to make this disclaimer particularly clear. If you are extreme MAGA or you are the extreme left, I am neither one. Which means, more than likely, I'm going to say something throughout the duration of the mini-series we are currently juggling on this channel that is probably going to offend you. If you cannot handle that like an adult, it is probably best that you go ahead and leave the channel now. There are probably other communities that might be a little bit more welcoming for that kind of engagement. My channel is not one of those. So, you have been warned in advance. Alright? And because we do talk on dark subjects, of course, parental supervision. Alright? Now, what's sparking this particular episode is this morning when I got my very awesome yogurt with my loose granola I like to throw into it because it makes it taste awesome. They had Carolyn Levitt come on to speak about how all these immigrants are getting all the Medicaid monies and they are totally like fraudulently taking all the Medicaid money. No. Pretty much everything she said is the math is not mathing. And I felt a deep need to dismember the argument. Because for God's sake. Okay? So, you can see it here. Her saying 1.4 illegal aliens who are currently improperly receiving Medicaid benefits will be kicked off the program to preserve it. Improperly, according to whom, Caroline? Well, I'm bringing up the question. Obviously, I did this research in order to pull up the answer. In fact, we're going to be taking a look at 2 different resources today, so you prepare yourselves, folks. This is going to be a little bit longer of a video, okay? So if you need a moment, pause, go grab yourself a snack, maybe some chamomile tea, because it's good for everything. Because we are about to go ahead and get into it. Let me start here. No, not there. Let me find where I pulled that up. That's continuing. Bear with me, folks. I pulled this up a moment ago. There we go. There we go. Perfect. All right. So, let's get started. Citizenship and alien status. Now, I want to make clear this is from Missouri. We're using it as an example because, again, for my old stomping grounds, my old workplace is, well, where I have most of my cloud information on this particular type of topic. And also, literally all the AIs are geared to give me Missouri information. But it is pretty uniform as well, and we do have some national information we'll be going over here in a moment. But let's start here. Citizen and alien status. The Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act of 1996 changed the eligibility for individuals who are not citizens of the United States. Though Health Net eligibility for aliens is based on whether the alien is qualified or non-qualified and the alien's date of entry into the United States. Now, what we are talking about qualified or non-qualified, we're not going off of what Caroline Levitt's definition of qualified or not qualified is. We're going off of actual laws here. What does the law say? Because that's what's important here. We can't lose sight of that. When we depend on other people's interpretations instead of actually looking in the horse's mouth, that's when things get real shady, and that's when slippery politicians can slip in things that screw over a whole bunch of people without nobody even knowing it's happening. So, Section 6036 of the Deficit Reduction Act of 2005 amended Section 1903 of the Social Security Act, requiring states to obtain satisfactory documentation of citizenship and identity prior to approving Medicaid benefits, effective July the 1st, 2006. For folks who are a little bit younger, this was during the George W. Bush administration. So anybody who wants to claim it's the Democrats, it's the Democrats, it's the Democrats, it was Bush. Okay? Individuals currently receiving Medicaid benefits were required to provide verification of citizenship and identity at the next reinvestigation, or one of the evals that we're required to take every so often to show that yes, we are still disabled, or yes, we're still low income and we still qualify for Medicaid. Certain individuals are exempt from having to provide documentation of citizenship and identity. And we'll go ahead and real quick, we're going to do a duplicate because I don't want to lose where we are, and I do have a tendency to do that. So what does that mean here? Alright, so the eligibility specialist has the responsibility of requesting necessary verification and recording information in case record that clearly documents all eligibility requirements for a program are met, or that or more requirements are not met and ineligibility exists. So, we are going to go down here to see exactly what that is. An applicant must be given 10 days to supply necessary information per request. A MoHealthNet for the aged, blind, and disabled application may be rejected after 2 requests for information forms. When the first written request expires, a second request for information form is automatically generated by FAMIS, allowing an additional 10 days to return requested information. So, this is a particular form, and let's see what they are looking for specifically. We're going to scroll down here a little bit. Okay, so obtain satisfactory documentation of citizenship and identity prior to receiving Medicaid benefits. Individuals receiving Medicaid benefits in July 2006 were required to provide verification of citizenship and identity at the next reinvestigation. So, we all had that. That was 9/11 generation, folks. There was a whole lot of legislation that was pumping through that had to do with that. So let me go here. Okay, the following individuals are exempt from having to provide documentation of citizenship and identity. Individuals receiving SSI, individuals receiving Medicare, individuals receiving Social Security Disability Insurance, individuals receiving old age survivors disability insurance benefits based on their own disability. Children added to MoHealthNet as newborns, as these children are deemed to have applied for and been found eligible as a result of the mother being an active participant at the time of birth. Documents to verify citizenship is usually what they require for us citizens. So, U.S. passport. If you're an immigrant, they require a certificate of naturalization, either an N-550 or N-570. Or a certificate of citizenship, 560 or 561, a Missouri driver's license inquiries, or state ID, like what I have, birth certificates, certification of birth, consular report of birth, certificate of birth abroad. Now, that would be for individuals who are immigrants. U.S. citizen ID card, American Indian card, the NMI card or IA-73, final adoption decree, official military record of service, hospital record or hospital letterhead, life or health insurance record showing a U.S. place of birth created at least 5 years prior to application, if you're able to do that, medical records that created at least 5 years before application. Acceptable forms of documentation that verify identity include, well, we've already kind of gone all over that, right? They need specific documentation that shows you as an immigrant, shows who you are, confirms your identity. So what does that mean? That means if you are coming in illegally, and you're not a refugee, you're not somebody that's seeking asylum, going in and applying for Medicaid, is going to be exceptionally difficult. Personally, to me, it looks pretty freaking impossible. Let me go back to where we were here. Alright, citizenship and alien status. So, qualified aliens entering prior to 8/22 of 1996. All qualified aliens who were in the U.S. prior to August 22nd, 1996, and who otherwise meet MC Plus eligibility criteria are eligible. The alien need not have been receiving Medicaid August 22nd of 1996. Qualified aliens entering after 8/22/96. For qualified aliens entering the U.S. on or after August 22nd, 1996, some may be eligible for MC Plus or Medicaid immediately, while others are subject to a 5-year period of eligibility. If you notice here, they mentioned an IM 173, September 19th, 2001. Now, qualified aliens eligible immediately. Qualified aliens entering the U.S. on or after August 22nd, 1996, who are members of the groups listed below and who otherwise meet Medicaid eligibility criteria, have no waiting period to obtain eligibility. So, this is going to be refugees under 207 of the INA, asylees under 208 of INA, aliens for whom deportation or removal has been withheld either under 243H or 214B3 of the INA. Cuban and Haitians entrants defined on Section 501E of the Refugee Education Assistance Act of 1980. American Indians born in Canada. Ameri-Asian immigrant. Trafficking victim as defined by the Trafficking Victims Act of 2000. Let's continue. Qualified aliens 5-year period of ineligibility, MAF. Qualified aliens entering the U.S. on or after August 22nd, 1996, who are not eligible for MC Plus or Medicaid for 5 years following their date of entry are listed below. Once the 5-year period of eligibility has expired, these qualified aliens will be eligible for Medicaid in the same manner as other qualified aliens. So this idea that illegal immigrants are just automatically all getting into Medicaid fraudulently but are not actually eligible is a bunch of garbage. Absolute garbage. First off, the individuals that do get in immediately has to apply very, very specific documentation. Okay? You can see it here. We require 207 of INA. We require 243H or 214. We need you to fill out the IM 173. If you do not have the documentation required from what we are reading here, you are not getting Medicaid. Okay? You have to have this documentation plus fill all the criteria we've been going over for those of us who are United States citizens. So this idea that we've got a whole bunch of these individuals coming in, getting in fraudulently, is a crock. It's an absolute crock. Alright? We're going to read a little bit more, and then we're going to start jumping into some very pointed questions that people should be asking Caroline Leavitt and the rest of the Trump administration, but for whatever reason it seems like mainstream media has lost its balls. I said what I said. Alright, qualified aliens 5-year period of ineligibility, MAF, we covered that. Exception, the 5-year ineligibility period does not apply to aliens listed above if they are on active duty in the U.S. Armed Forces, a veteran, the spouse or unmarried dependent of child of individuals, A or B. A dependent child is an unmarried child under age 18 or a child claimed as dependent on the active duty person's veteran income tax from or unmarried surviving spouse of a veteran. Then there's qualified immigrants with limited eligibility period. Public Laws 110, 161, 110, 181, 110, 329, and 11108 grant certain Iraqi and Afghan immigrants special immigrant status under Section 101A 27 of the Immigration and Nationality Act, effective December the 26th, 2007. Under special immigrant status, the immigrant is eligible for refugee resettlement assistance, entitlement programs, and other benefits as a refugee. Prior to December 19th, 2009, eligibility could not exceed 8 months. So these are individuals who were out there in Afghanistan and Iraq acting as interpreter for the U.S. Armed Forces. As you know, some individuals have actually complained about that without realizing, do you know the kind of risks these people face if they go back home right now, considering what they are known to have done to help the U.S. Armed Forces if they decide to deport them back? Think on it. Really think on it. Continue to read on that. The Defense Appropriations Act of FY 2010 provides that the effective December the 19th, 2009, Iraqi and Afghan special immigrants are eligible for benefits to the same extent and for the same period as refugees pursuant to Section 207 of the Immigrants and Nationality Act. That other eligibility requirements are met, Iraqi and Afghan immigrants are eligible for benefits indefinitely. So much for Caroline Leavitt's, but those who are not properly eligible. Alright. Now, there's a whole lot of more information, and as you guys know, I always make sure that that's going to be available for you right there in the description box, so before a smart aleck comes in there to wonder, well, where are you getting your information? It's from dss.mo.gov, first off, for MoHealthNet. But the laws we are reading over regards to immigrants who can receive Medicaid and what type of documentation is required and what hoops they have to jump to in order to be considered eligible if they meet all the other criteria is listed quite clearly right here. So please spare me. For the love of God, nobody has time for that. Alright, now, I know this is on Grok, folks, but I found Grok rather useful in some areas, and I decided to ask some pertinent questions that I haven't really seen anybody ask, not even independent media. So, let me show you what I got up to when I first got up this morning. We're going to go through the whole thing. As you can see, I dug up a little bit of Grok here. Alright, so my first question was, based on what percentage of individuals who are currently on Medicaid are immigrants? My first question. Based on available data, eligible non-citizen immigrants account for approximately 6% of Medicaid and Children's Health Insurance Program CHIP enrollees. This figure includes only lawfully present immigrants with qualified immigration status, which is why I pulled up the information we just did, so you would know exactly what that meant, such as legal permanent residents, refugees, and asylees, as undocumented immigrants are generally ineligible for federally funded Medicaid, except for emergency services. So this idea that they're taking all our federally funded Medicaid money is absolute nonsense. Exact percentages may vary slightly based by state and year due to differences in the eligibility rules and enrollment patterns. For instance, some states use state-only funds to expand coverage to certain immigrant groups, which could affect local figures. And of course, they were letting me know if I needed a breakdown. Now, I am going to see if I can go ahead and link this for you all as well in the description box so you can read it on your own and also go ahead and be able to get access to the links that Grok has so kindly provided us with. This interview is provided to you by Grok. Now, here was my second question. Out of that percentage of 6%, how many are refugees? Data on the exact percentage of Medicaid and CHIP enrollees who are refugees is limited, as Medicaid systems typically do not track refugee status specifically. However, based on available information, we can piece together an estimate. The 6% of Medicaid and CHIP enrollees who are eligible non-citizen immigrants, approximately 4.2 million people given total Medicaid CHIP enrollment of around 70 million, include various groups like legal permanent residents, refugees, asylees, and others with qualified immigration status. Refugees and asylees are exempt from the 5-year waiting period from Medicaid eligibility, making them a distinct subset, which we went over just a moment ago. According to the Office of Refugee Resettlement, over 60% of recently arrived refugees with health insurance have Medicaid coverage, but the total number of refugees in the U.S. is relatively small. About 3 million since the 1970s, with annual arrivals typically under 100,000 in recent years. So this idea that we are being invaded and they're taking up all the Medicaid is absolutely categorically false. The math is not mathing. It is very, very, very much math is not mathing. Okay? Given this, refugees likely represent a small fraction of the 6% figure. Estimates suggest refugees and asylees together might account for roughly 1 to 2% of total Medicaid CHIP enrollees. Let me read that again, just for you, Caroline. Estimates suggest refugees and asylees together might account for roughly 1 to 2% of total Medicaid CHIP enrollees, translating to about 700,000 to 1.4 million individuals. Precise numbers are tough to pin down due to data gaps and various state reporting. Now, here's my next question. How much Medicaid funding is used to cover this group's health care and or access to other services? The 6% of Medicaid and Children's Health Insurance Program, also known as CHIP enrollees, who are eligible non-citizen immigrants, including refugees, asylees, and other lawfully present immigrants, account for a relatively small portion of overall Medicaid spending. While precise figures for this group's healthcare costs are not always broken out in available data, we can derive estimates based on the broader Medicaid expenditure patterns and specific studies. Total Medicaid spending in the fiscal year of 2023 was approximately $850 billion federal and state combined. So that's not federal funds, that's a combination of both. Since eligible non-citizen immigrants represent about 6% of enrollees, their share of spending is roughly proportional, though adjusted for factors like lower healthcare utilization compared to U.S.-born citizens. Studies indicate immigrants, including non-citizens, tend to use less healthcare and incur lower per-person costs, often less than half the cost of U.S.-born adults, due to younger age, better overall health, and barriers to access like language or fear of engaging with systems. Gee, let's turn on the news and figure out why. Assuming a conservative estimate, the 6% of enrollees likely account for approximately 4 to 5% of total Medicaid spending, or about $34 to $42.5 billion annually, covering healthcare services like hospital care, physician visits, and prescription drugs. refugees specifically, who may constitute 1 to 2% of total Medicaid CHIP enrollees, roughly 700,000 to 1.4 million individuals as estimated earlier, their share of spending is even smaller. Given their exemption from the 5-year waiting period and higher likelihood of immediate enrollment, refugees might account for a disproportionate but still modest share of 6% of group costs. If we estimate their healthcare costs at a similar per person rate as other non-citizens, adjusted for potential higher needs due to resettlement challenges, refugees might likely represent 5 to 10 billion of annual Medicaid spending. These figures exclude emergency Medicaid, which covers limited services such as labor and delivery for non-citizens and eligible for full Medicaid, including undocumented immigrants. Emergency Medicaid spending was $3.8 billion in FY 2023, less than 0.5% of total Medicaid spending. I'm going to read that for everyone again, just for you, Caroline. Less than 0.5% of total Medicaid spending. And that is not primarily used by refugees or other qualified immigrants who typically access full scope benefits. Note that these estimates are approximate, as Medicaid spending varies by state and data on specific immigrant subgroups like refugees is not consistently reported. If you need, well, of course, they give you all of that. And to the next question. And what is the current overall amount of federal funding for Medicaid? Or how much federal funding does Medicaid currently receive overall for everyone? In the fiscal year of 2023, total Medicaid spending, federal and state combined, was approximately $871.7 billion. The federal government covered about 69% of this, equating to roughly $614 billion in federal funding for Medicaid. This figure includes coverage for all enrollees, including the 6% who are eligible non-citizen immigrants, such as refugees, asylees, and other lawfully present immigrants. For the non-citizen immigrant group, including refugees, their estimated share of Medicaid spending is $34 to $42.5 billion, with the federal portion being approximately $23.5 to $29.3 billion, based on the 69% federal share. Would anyone like to explain to me, like I am a 5-year-old, how somehow kicking all of these poor people off of Medicaid they absolutely qualify for and absolutely need is somehow going to equal up to the multiple billions? Like, what was that number? Somewhere around 260 billion? Exactly. How is kicking off all these poor folks off of Medicaid somehow magically going to get us to that number, Trump administration? Couldn't we actually do a lot better in regards to reducing the national debt, with, instead of attacking poor people and people fleeing horrific regimes and immigrants who are just looking for a better life for themselves, we could, just tax the rich properly? We have a few billionaires in this country that could by themselves, wipe out the entirety of the national debt today. But instead, we're putting it on the backs of the poor and the immigrants. And this is somehow going to make us great again? The math isn't mathing. Even if you're a sociopath, the math isn't mathing. If all you care about is the numbers, it's not mathing. Remember during the Trump and Musk little spat with one another, where Trump threatened to yank his government contracts to reduce the debt? Bruh! Yes, do that! Do that! Because that's going to do a lot more to reduce the debt than kicking off vulnerable people off of Medicaid. In particular, immigrants that don't even take up a fraction of the overall cost of the individuals on Medicaid, but we're going to pick on them. Let me continue. For refugees specifically, 1.2% of enrollees, the federal share of their Medicaid costs is roughly $3.5 to $6.9 billion annually. These estimates are derived from enrollment and spending patterns with variations due to state and specific policies and data limitations. So let's take a look at that. About 34 to 42.5. These people are using 3, maybe 6 billion. Again, the math, not mathing. These estimates are derived from enrollment and spending patterns with variations due to state-specific policies and data limitations. Now, I'm going to ask the loaded question that will probably get me in trouble, but what else is new? Is it a day that ends in Y? Then I'm probably in trouble with somebody, and I just don't care. Do you believe, I asked Grok, based on current available data, that the Trump administration is misrepresenting how much of Medicaid funding is currently being used for immigrant health care and other services? I haven't attacked them directly, but to use their word, Caroline, triggered me this morning. So, screw it. I'm not dipping a toe in, I'm going to jump in. Let's do this. The Trump administration's claim about Medicaid funding for immigrant health care, particularly for undocumented immigrants, appear to exaggerate the issue based on available data. Here's a breakdown of the evidence and reasoning. Federal Medicaid funding restrictions. Federal law, specifically the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act of 1996, restricts federal Medicaid funds to U.S. citizens and certain qualified non-citizens, which we just went over a moment ago, who meet eligibility criteria. Undocumented immigrants are generally ineligible for federally funded Medicaid, except for emergency services, such as labor and delivery, which accounted for only $3.8 billion, or 0.4% of total Medicaid spending of the $871.7 billion in FY 2023. Allow me to read that again. I'm going to read that again. Let me find the beginning of the sentence here. Yeah, I got to read the whole thing. Alright, federally, specifically the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act of 1996 restricts federal Medicaid funds to U.S. citizens and certain unqualified non-citizens, permanent residents, refugees, and asylees who meet eligibility criteria. Undocumented immigrants are generally ineligible for federally funded Medicaid except for emergency services, which accounted for only $3.8 billion, or to put that in perspective for you folks, 0.4% of total Medicaid spending out of $871.7 billion. Tell me how they're supposed to be the ones who are the drain on us again. Because personally, between tax breaks and government contracts, I'm going to say the billionaires are more welfare queens than the 0.4% who are on Medicaid just in our country trying to make a better lives for themselves. Maybe that's controversial, I don't know. But again, the math isn't mathing. State-funded programs mischaracterized. The Trump administration and some Republican lawmakers have claimed that states are misusing federal Medicaid funds to cover undocumented immigrants, citing programs in states like California, New York, and Illinois. However, these states use state-only funds, not federal dollars, to provide health care coverage to undocumented immigrants. For example, California's Medi-Cal program spends $8.5 billion annually from state revenue to cover approximately 1.6 million immigrants, including those without legal status. These are not federal Medicaid funds. You hear that, MAGA? Not federal Medicaid funds. There is a difference. Yet administration rhetoric often conflates state-funded programs with Medicaid, creating a misleading impression. That they do. Claims of widespread misuse. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, under the Trump administration announced increased oversight to prevent states from illegally using federal Medicaid funds for non-citizens, citing an executive order titled Ending Taxpayer Subsidization of Open Borders. However, experts like Dr. Ben Summers from Harvard have stated there is no substantial evidence that states are widely misusing federal funds for non-emergency care for undocumented immigrants. In particular, not in Ruby Red, Missouri. Please, for the love of God, Trump administration, stop smoking crack. Okay? Because the fact of the matter is, undocumented immigrants get bare minimum help in regards to getting things taken care of through health care. Any of them that have Medicaid is usually extremely limited, and you know what? They have the legal documentation that says they are eligible. All the proper paperwork in place. The administration's focus on this issue appears to amplify a minor issue for political purposes, as emergency Medicaid spending, the only federal funding available for undocumented immigrants, which is literally, if you get run over by a car, if you're delivering a baby, things that require immediate emergency room care. We're not talking about somebody who's going in who needs treatment because they got bronchitis. It's a small fraction of the total budget. Congressional Budget Office, CBO analysis. A House-passed reconciliation bill in 2025 supported by Trump was described as removing millions of undocumented immigrants from Medicaid. There isn't undocumented. However, the CBO clarified that the 1.4 million people potentially losing coverage are enrolled in state-funded programs, not Medicaid. Boom. You see, I knew that sounded wrong. Because in regards to undocumented immigrants, if you don't have the proper paperwork and you don't fit the criteria, you don't go through the evals, you don't get Medicaid. There are other state programs that deal with emergency health care, on the other hand, that generally will cover them in those types of situations. Quite a few non-for-profits, in fact, I know. There's a few Catholic charities out here that will cover for anyone, immigrant or otherwise, who don't have medical insurance, who have gone to the ER room. In fact, if you go to Mercy, it's a Catholic hospital, If you don't qualify for Medicaid, they provide you paper information to apply for those programs, as well as a few of the state-sponsored ones, so that you can get your medical costs covered for your stay inside the hospital. Also known as, I've been inside hospitals around this state since before I could walk, because my mom has worked in healthcare longer than a lot of these individuals who are literally bitching on topics they understand nothing about have been alive. Can ya tell? This got me so heated this morning. I'm ready to go. Let's do this. Alright. This representation fuels the narrative that Medicaid itself is being exploited by undocumented immigrants, when in reality, the bill targets state-funded coverage, penalizing states by reducing federal Medicaid reimbursements from 90% to 80% for ACA expansion populations if they continue state-funded programs for immigrants. So even if it is a state-funded program that has no attachment to Medicaid whatsoever, those states are being penalized anyway, and they are broadcasting it as, well, they're providing services for undocumented immigrants off of Medicaid, when that is not what's happening at all. Now, where does this confusion come from? Well, if you go to the hospital, you go through the ER, and you're an individual who doesn't have insurance. In regards to what type of programs can help you cover that bill, is all done in the same office. Same individual. So first, you apply for Medicaid. If it comes back, they don't approve you, you're undocumented, they will sit you down and go over with you what your options might be. Like trying with one of the Catholic charities, or there's quite a few evangelical charities out here that help cover that sort of thing, especially for unwed single immigrant mothers who have fled horrific regimes. Quite a few charities that cover that sort of treatment out here as well. And there's state programs to help cover that as well. None of those programs are Medicaid. But because they have already created this image that supposedly undocumented people coming into the country are ripping off Medicaid, they are punishing states for programs that we fund by ourselves. This is state money, not federal money, but they are going to penalize us by taking away a certain percentage of federal Medicaid funding because we have state programs to help cover emergency care for undocumented immigrants. Someone make it make sense. There are way too many despicable human beings in this world with no compassion, no mercy, and no love in their hearts. This indirectly affects the U.S. citizens' Medicaid coverage, not undocumented immigrants. So state-funded programs that cover people who come through ERs who do not have insurance, they usually cover both the poor and some undocumented immigrants. But they're state-funded. There is no federal Medicaid money that is getting funneled into those programs. It's literally just us states. But now, we gotta look good to the public, right? We gotta continue to push this little lie. We gotta act like we're punishing people now, because now we have people confusing state-funded programs with Medicaid. So now, we are going to remove federal money that we usually give you for Medicaid because you have other programs that are not related to Medicaid that is helping these people out. It's insane. It's literally batshit insane. Data sharing controversy. Reports indicate the Trump administration shared personal data of Medicaid enrollees, including immigration status, with the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, to support immigration enforcement, raising privacy concerns. This move, tied to the same executive order, suggests a broader strategy to link Medicaid to immigration policy, potentially overstating the issue to justify enforcement actions. Critics, including California Governor Gavin Newsom, have called this legally dubious and a violation of privacy, further indicating the administration's focus on immigrants and Medicaid may be driven by political motives rather than fiscal concerns. If you just look at the math alone, let's put emotions aside for a moment. If you were just a simple accountant and you remove the human factor, and you just look at the numbers that it is showing us through each of the questions we have gone through, the math isn't mathing. Point blank, if you care about nothing else, the math isn't mathing. What they say is happening isn't happening. You can't even, the numbers aren't even close. Even with estimated data, the numbers are not even remotely close to where you can kind of construe it. Alright. Estimated costs and context. As noted earlier, eligible non-citizen immigrants, 6% of Medicaid and CHIP enrollees, or about 4.2 million people, account for an estimated 34 to 42.5 billion of total Medicaid spending, with the federal share being roughly 23.5 to 29.3 billion. Refugees, a subset of this group, 1 to 2% of enrollees, likely account for 5 to 10 billion, with a federal share of 3.5 to 6.9 billion. These figures are proportional to enrollment and reflect lower per person cost for immigrants compared to U.S.-born citizens. The administration's emphasis on taxpayer subsidization of immigrants often ignores that these costs are for legally eligible groups, and that undocumented immigrants' access is limited to minimal emergency services. Thank you. Now we're going to get to the conclusion here. The Trump administration's narrative that Medicaid is being significantly misused to fund health care for undocumented immigrants is not fully supported by the data. Federal Medicaid funds are tightly restricted, and state-funded programs for undocumented immigrants are distinct from Medicaid. If you're an undocumented immigrant, you're not getting Medicaid. Point blank. Point blank. Okay? Claims about widespread misuse appear exaggerated, as emergency Medicaid spending is less than 1% of the total budget, and state-funded programs are mischaracterized as Medicaid that aren't Medicaid. The administration's actions, like data sharing with DHS and pushing legislation to penalize states, seem to prioritize immigration enforcement over accurate fiscal accounting. Thank you! When we say math is not mathing. Potentially misleading the public about the scale of immigrant-related Medicaid costs. Now, we got potential additional sources if needed, and yes, we're going to deep dive into this further. But I think this was a pretty good overlooking at all the problems with statements like those Carolyn Levitt are making in regards to, but we're subsidizing undocumented immigrants with things like Medicaid, when in all actuality I already knew off the top of my head that that was categorically false. But I know how they're going to try and play it, which we'll get into that in another video. But for right now, I think we've covered enough information. And so we're going to go ahead and close on out for this one, folks. And folks, we are a small channel. We don't have a whole lot of bells and whistles. But if you wouldn't mind just sending this around, because I would like someone with a far larger platform than mine, who is far better at doing this sort of thing than me, if they would just be able to get this and really take it and run with it in the way that mainstream media really isn't. Somebody who's actually willing to go over this argument in detail. I would definitely like somebody to be able to do that, that's going to be able to get this out to more people. So, if you could, please go ahead and do that. Now, for our closeout, we don't get very many views on this channel. The few we do tend to get removed from time to time. So, folks, if you would be so kind, please don't forget to hit the like button, hit subscribe, and please, folks, don't forget to hit the comments. I do appreciate your time, and as always, folks, we here at Spilling Tea hope you have a good one. And make sure you hit the notification bell, because we are coming back tomorrow on Sunday, and we are going right back into our Section 8 series. Bye-bye, everyone.